Most of us will have played with a train set at some time during our formative years. Almost anyone who's travelled by train will understand the urge to sit in the driver's cab and bring the train into the station. And there can't be many who haven't known that strange and unaccountable satisfaction of simply watching trains go by. The train put the horse and cart out of business and made possible the mass transportation of people on a regular basis. The arrival of the timetable brought order to the lives of everyone on the move. Despite the motor car and airplane, there's still something special about a train, something almost majestic in its smooth, unchallenged progress down the line. Even though the train became practical and commonplace, the romance has always remained. And nowhere more so than on those most ingenious railway systems, the metros. We're going to 10 different cities to find that romance. Well, this is how it all began. If you wanted to get somewhere, you walked on your two legs, or in some cases, four. But as cities grew in size and became busier, crossing town has become more and more perilous. Today, there are something like 500 million motor vehicles in the world. Try crossing the street in any large city, and it often seems you have to wait while the whole lot passes by. Traffic jams are nothing new. And this picture of London 100 years ago is a good illustration of the reason engineers began to think of going underground in search of a better way to travel. Here in London, they began in 1861 by digging up the roads, laying rails and roofing them over. In this way, the first of the world's underground railways was created, stretching 6 kilometres from the mainline station at Paddington to the city at St. Paul's. The first train ran on January the 10th, 1863, and was an occasion of wild enthusiasm. And although the directors of the enterprise looked a little doubtful, the railway quickly became enormously popular and successful. The trains were pulled by steam engines, specially designed for running in low tunnels. This, of course, was before electric motors were invented, and before anyone worried about pollution. The use of underground trains for quick and easy travel spread rapidly across London. A major advance was the Baker Street Metropolitan Line, the Metro, a name later to be adopted all over the world. The line eventually ran more than 60 kilometres out of London, and it's still in use today. 120 years after it all began, London is served by 400 kilometres of metro. Oddly enough, Londoners themselves refer to it simply as the Underground or the Tube. But whatever its name, it's still the quickest way to cross town. and it's still being extended. Look up at the Eiffel Tower, and it's easy to see why it's one of the world's instant landmarks. Yet it does more than merely dominate the skyline of Paris. It also marks the point where the city first went underground. It was in 1900, at the time of the Great Exhibition of Paris. France was eager to demonstrate all the wonders of French engineering. So visitors were invited not only to look up at the Eiffel Tower, but down to the little metro system which began beneath its foundations. Yet if it began as a piece of Parisian flamboyance, it soon became an absolute essential to life as the city grew during the 20th century. The metro is as much a part of romantic Paris as Gitane and garlic. But its purpose was and is more prosaic, simply to cater for an ever-increasing population in an ever-expanding city. That need is still there. But in Paris, as in other cities, the metro has moved on. Once they built the metro out to the suburbs, where people lived. But now, people come to live in places where the metro already exists. The suburb of La Défense is a case in point. This huge development could not exist without the metro facility to ferry great numbers of people to and from the heart of Paris. Of course, being French, they do things other people don't do. And much of the planning for the Paris Metro is now devoted to super express trains, which make only 1 or 2 stops on the way to the city centre. In 19th century Vienna, planning was something they didn't do a lot of. Until 1857, the city was enclosed within walls that made traffic a problem long before anyone thought of going underground. The tramcar was king, and proved as much of a damn nuisance as tramcars anywhere else. Horses and carriages still waltz serenely through the streets. But under the surface, much has changed. Late starters in the metro business, their first was not until 1966, the Viennese now have as efficient a system as any city in the world. At the moment, there are only 32 kilometers of metro in Vienna, but with stations every 800 meters, the system serves a densely populated city of 2 million people very well. Soviet transportation tends to be on a spectacular scale. First to put a spacecraft in orbit, the Russians were the first to build a metro system to prove a political point. Lenin, then Stalin, demanded that a Moscow metro be built, and that it should be a monument to socialism and socialist engineering. Work began in 1932, and the first train ran at precisely 7 a.m. on May the 15th, 1935. Since then, this has become the world's busiest metro. As few of Moscow's 10 million people can afford cars, nearly everyone uses public transport, with the result that the Moscow metro records millions of passenger journeys every day. The escalators carry 9,000 people an hour into the metro, where they're borne into splendidly baroque surroundings in which a mere train seems almost out of place. But it's highly automated and very sophisticated. Trains arrive every 80 seconds, a frequency unmatched anywhere in the world, all of which makes Muscovites very proud of their metro. Californians are much less impressed with public transport, even though this could rightly be called the most beautiful of all metro trains. For the fact is that San Francisco is part of the world's most advanced society, and its people are firmly wedded to the motor car. Furthermore, San Francisco's sentimental feelings are mainly reserved for its cable cars. A plan to remove them in the 1950s caused a near riot. After all, they've been grinding up and down the hills of the city since 1873, and even survived the great earthquake of 1906. San Francisco's susceptibility to earthquakes was one reason for the city's reluctance to build a metro. It didn't begin operation until 1972, and then ran only on weekdays. Now it has a full service, with 114 kilometers of track, and more is being planned. To entice Californians away from their cars, the metro builders built luxury into their system, making these not only beautiful trains, but supremely comfortable ones. Anyone who left their heart in San Francisco will probably find it riding the metro. In Stockholm, the metro trains owe more to practicality than design. Perhaps because to build a metro system at all meant overcoming enormous engineering problems. Almost 1/3 of Stockholm's metro runs above ground, or to be more precise, above water. 1/10 of the system runs on viaducts crossing deep valleys which are part of the city's mountainous hinterland. The idea of a metro for Stockholm was mooted at the turn of the century as being the only alternative to the annual freeze on movement, which was the result of Sweden's brutal Arctic winter. However, it was another 50 years before Stockholm's geography could be overcome. The outcome of which was that this capital city can now boast a great variety of high and most graceful railway bridges. A glance at the map shows how necessary the bridges were. What it does not show is that the land between the fjords is pure granite, through which the metro tunnels had to be blasted. But the Swedes are nothing if not determined, and despite all the difficulties, they've created a system, parts of which are truly breathtaking in scale. They even held a banquet down here when the metro opened. But then the whole of the Stockholm system has style. The 3 Stockholm metro lines meet here in the center of the city. The trains themselves are fairly ordinary. It's when you get underground that the grandeur and the originality become apparent. But that's something we'll come to later. Nothing very original about this. It's a gigantic festival of beer drinking, staged in West Germany's second largest city, Munich. It happens every October, and they get through about 10 million litres of beer in 2 weeks, which is probably why the most reliable form of transport in town has always run on rails. The Munich tram system was regularly overwhelmed by the millions of visitors who come to Munich's various wine and beer festivals. But it was not until the city was chosen for the 1972 Olympics that a metro, or S-Bahn, was built. It was started in 1967 and was opened in time to serve the Olympic Village here on the outskirts of the city. In the past 40 years, the old provincial town of Munich has grown into a city of 2 million people. In the last 20, the metro too has expanded significantly. It now has 40 kilometers of track in 5 lines across the city, and is currently being increased by 1/3. Believe it or not, the Theresienwiese station is the busiest in Europe at festival time. This is the afternoon interlude before the army of visitors arrives to attack the beer tents and the funfair above ground. The city of Budapest stands on one of the great waterways of Europe. For thousands of years, this has been a natural crossing point on the river Danube. And what flourished here were the twin settlements of Buda and Pest on either bank of the river. Since Roman times, this has been an important and busy crossroads between Eastern and Western Europe, a city of music and romance. It was so much a city of music and romance that the first suggestion for a city metro was firmly rejected on the grounds that it would be too noisy and would interfere with the natural pursuit of good living. However, given its importance, it's natural, perhaps, that Budapest should become a pioneer of the metro system, following London and leading Paris by more than a decade to open the first metro in continental Europe. What's more, the Budapest system was the first in the world to use electrical power. By the end of World War II, however, Budapest was in ruins. Of the city's public transport system, only about a dozen buses remained. The metro was shattered, and city planners had to start over again with a new network of deep tunnels under the Danube to link the two halves of the city. The population of Budapest, like Hungarian wine, travels well and has always been highly mobile, a characteristic which provides plenty of work for the city's metro builders. The city of Lille is not the place where you might expect to find dynamic, new thinking. After all, it's an old industrial centre situated on the fringe of the coal fields in northeastern France. As such, it's frequently felt the chilly winds of economic recession rattling at its windows over the last 20 years. Nevertheless, it's in Lille that we find the most superior and technically advanced metro system now in operation. There are no drivers or guards on the trains. They run automatically, and the doors open and close on demand. Stations are designed to merge with their surroundings, and the entire system is founded on a belief in modern technology. Employing the latest in electronics enables the Lille authorities to operate the whole metro network using no more than a dozen people in a central control room. The rest is down to le computer et les microchips. Washington, D.C., and a scene which sums up the whole story of modern transport: the airplane, the motor car, and the metro train. The Georgetown district of Washington is the old heart of the city. Its preserved streets make it a highly desired residential area. Yet its very affluence make it a difficult location to travel to or from, since its streets were clogged with cars. The solution to the problem was slow in coming. An underground railway was proposed back in 1958 and was given approval by President Eisenhower. It was endorsed by Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, but didn't get the go-ahead until Jimmy Carter was in the White House. At one time, it looked like having more presidential seals than passengers, but it finally opened in the nation's bicentennial year, 1976. And when it did, it was the last word in comfort and passenger consideration. Washington long ago spilled over from the District of Columbia. Its founders designated as the seat of American government. Great parts of the capital's working population are now in the bordering states of Virginia and Maryland. New suburban developments are being created every year. Much of this new expansion follows the line of the metro system, as does this suburb of Crystal City, whose commuting residents are firmly committed to the capital's 112-kilometer metro network. The metro is the Washington system's official title. The more usual name for this type of railway in America is the subway. But democratic in all things, Washington held a referendum amongst its population, and they voted for the name Metro. The Americans may have wasted time in getting started on the Washington Metro, but when they did start, they spared no effort or expense to meet the very fastidious demands of the American consumer. What they ended up with must be easily the most luxurious metro in the world. The latest trains on the network cost $1 million each. But then they'd have to be rather special, or they'd never let them into such magnificent stations. The first metro trains ran more than 120 years ago, and for some time they were unique to London. Today, they're everywhere. There are metros in at least 70 cities in the world, and as many more are actively planning to introduce them. And small wonder, for the metro has been proved beyond doubt the quickest and cheapest means of moving people around and across major cities. And in a curious way, every one has its own feeling, exactly reflecting the character of the city overhead. Each city has its own reasons for wanting a metro system, and to examine the forces which affected their thinking, we've traveled to London, Paris, Stockholm, Lille, San Francisco, Budapest, Munich, Washington, Vienna, and, well, where else could this be but Moscow? For millions of people all over the world, the metro is a daily necessity. It's an interlude where all travelers are equal. It's part of life. A happy experience for some, slightly less exhilarating for others. For the majority, it's simply the easiest way to cross a city. And whatever else, it beats walking. Different trains, different places. But the metros of the world share one thing in common. It is that the making of a metro system is as complex an engineering challenge as any in the field of public transport. The construction work involved varies in complexity from city to city, of course. But bridges, tunnels, viaducts, cuttings and flyovers are all par for the course. And that's taking no account of the basic need to tunnel through clay, chalk, limestone and granite, through hills and under rivers. So let's spare a thought for the engineers and take a look at the ways in which they solved the many and varied problems confronting them in making the metros. By the mid-19th century, Britain was already in the grip of railway fever. The country was alive with the hiss and rumble of steam locomotion as competing railways crisscrossed the island from end to end. So by the time London's Underground Railway was being planned, the expertise was already there, and so was the workforce. Not that the work was all that complicated at first. In laying the railway, they mostly dug up the roads and covered them again when the tracks had been laid. London's original Metropolitan line was too early for electricity, so the motive power was steam. To avoid passengers being choked to death from smoke in the tunnels, it used carriages without windows. Well, you can't have everything, but people did complain they never knew where they were. But there are penalties attached to pioneering. For Londoners, it is that some station facilities on today's Underground were put in place when Disraeli was Prime Minister. These lifts and their shiny brass controls were once ahead of their time. But even their old world charm is wearing thin, and they're now being replaced. Fortunately, most of London's metro equipment is of more modern design, but it all has to be kept working, day in, day out. The scale of the task is enormous. It is, after all, the world's largest metro. On any weekday in London, there are 500 underground trains in operation throughout the network, 1,000 kilometres of railway line to maintain, 300 bridges, plus power lines, signalling equipment, workshops, and no fewer than 248 stations. The Bavarian people of Munich believe in meeting their problems head-on. Like this famous clock, it's part of the city tradition, which includes this early version of commuter train strap hanging. The problem for Munich was its popularity. People like coming here, and the friendly Bavarians are delighted to welcome them. After all, this is how they sell all that beer. Then Munich was named the 1972 Olympic City, and the problem was compounded. So in 1967, they set about making a metro. And what began as a feeder line to the Olympics has now become part of a 5-line network which is still being extended. The work ethic of West Germany decrees that work here carries on 24 hours a day. Although the environmental ethic, strong here in Munich, decrees that heavy engineering is carried on only during daylight hours. Between the two, however, the engineers advance in that admirably relentless way for which the Germans are famous. And the metro grows ever larger. The Munich metro is swift and efficient, rather than aesthetically pleasing. But there are generations of experience behind it. It was a German company which produced the world's first electric locomotive. They wheeled it out in 1879 for the Berlin Industrial Exhibition. The machine could travel at 7 kilometers an hour, but was hardly powerful enough to pull a train, let alone today's commuter crowds. The same company still produces the trains which serve the Munich metro today. But there the similarity ends. Today's trains are computer-controlled and partly automated. Although they have conductors in the driving cab, trains are controlled through a centralized signaling system which leaves nothing to chance or human error. Fully automatic, perfectly safe, proof against human failure. It's good to know, especially if you're on your way home from a Munich beer festival. Some things never change. They've been playing bull here on this Paris sidewalk for generations, quite oblivious to the history that was made 100 meters below, where they made the Paris Metro. Old film from the early 1900s shows how they did it, using human muscle to dig out one section of the tunnel at a time and hauling the earth away in trucks with men as mules. The route taken by the first train on the new Paris Metro is still used as part of the modern system. When it first opened, the Metro was regarded with tremendous suspicion by the people of Paris. Some called it a monstrous invention. But soon, riding the Metro became chic. Inventive it certainly was, and still is. For example, many trains on the Metro run on rubber tires. The tires are filled with high-pressure nitrogen and run on asphalt tracks to give a smoother and quieter ride. It's one of those unusual elements which make the Paris Metro so specially Parisian, so utterly French. You have only to take a ride on it to meet a whole range of indelibly Gallic attitudes, like this random sample of passengers stopped for not having tickets. Like London, there's a lot of the original left on the Paris Metro. Old iron girders with sturdy rivets and solid cast iron stairways abound. Yet here, it's not so much a sign of the past, more a tribute to the care they invested in their metro all those years ago.
Qui tournait pour mieux oublier. Je sais qu'elle a trouvé ce coin de soleil dont elle parlait, qui nous faisait tant rêver, qui nous faisait tant rêver, qui nous faisait tant rêver.
California is the land of superlatives, and in San Francisco they have at least one. The city can boast the world's longest underwater railway tunnel. It links San Francisco with Oakland across Oakland Bay. It's 5.7 kilometers long, and it crosses the bay 100 meters below the seabed. It's all part of a metro network which links San Francisco with some 20 other towns and cities in the Bay Area. Of course, San Franciscans are past masters at engineering accomplishment. Who else would create a cable car system in a town modelled on the Alps? And who would even think of building a metro in ground liable to earthquakes? Well, here, they did both. When they considered building their very sophisticated metro system, they may well have started by taking a good look at the cable cars before deciding to make the metros a whole lot less complicated. Much of this cable car equipment has been here for well over 100 years, hauling the cars at 15 kilometers an hour up and down San Francisco's sunny slopes. But there's no mechanical help available at the terminus. Reversing the cars on the turntable always has been, and still is, a matter of pushing and pulling. Metro cars have also to be turned. What makes it easy is a turntable resting on air. Moving it requires only a gentle push. The cars weigh 30 tons each, but manoeuvring them in the marshalling yards is equally simple. Coupling coaches to form a train requires only one operator. The rest is automatic. Girls who yearn to become train drivers should apply to San Francisco. There are equal opportunities here for anyone who wants to act out that old childhood dream of being at the controls. Well, that's how the driver sees it. But in reality, she's not in total control of the train. Most of the responsibility for safe running is routinely taken by the ubiquitous computer. From here, microelectronic circuits control everything from the speed of the trains to the opening of the doors at the appropriate places. All trains on the 114-kilometer network are linked through the computer so as to proceed at the right intervals and at the correct speeds. Signals and braking are also automatic. Computers at each station control the points for switching lines. Even so, the computer system is currently being used at little over half its capacity. San Francisco has overcome considerable difficulties to create its very own metro, but earthquakes and deep water tunnels are nothing to engineers of imagination and skill. The real problem here is the motor car society. Despite air-conditioned trains, comfortable seats and a frequent service, most people in this cosmopolitan city still prefer to drive. They must be crazy. Budapest's decision to build a small underground railway system back in the 1870s put it well ahead of the rest of continental Europe and caused a sensation around the world. The idea was said to be dangerous to health. One American newspaper reported that passengers were suffering burst eardrums from the pressure of air in the tunnels. Some of the structure from those early days remains visible today. What also survives is this collection of tickets and memorabilia from that brave era. Some of these tickets were dispensed in 1911 by revolutionary new automatic machines, which were said to be able to detect forged coins. But apparently they didn't detect enough of them and were quickly withdrawn. The history of Budapest's metro is similarly checkered. 2 world wars rumbled through the city and left it in ruins. That the metro exists at all, given Hungary's post-war experience, says a great deal for the nation's determination. A start on the present system was begun in 1950 and was scheduled to finish in 1955. There's no happiness without tears, they say, and most people regret that rebuilding the Budapest metro meant ripping through the city park and reducing the size of the lake. But the urgency of the task no doubt overcame sentiment. In any case, the Russians took an interest in the Budapest metro and sent some of their best men from Moscow to help in the planning and development of the project. Even this did not ensure smooth progress. First, the money ran out, then came the Hungarian uprising. Deadlines for completion of the line were pushed back and back. Eventually, it was finished in 1970. Now, 1.5 million people use the Budapest metro every day, and it's more than simply a means of getting to and from work. In every sense, this metro system is a transition between the 2 sides of the Danube and 2 parts of Hungary. It's a direct link between the capital's 2 main rail stations, which serve the Great Plain and the Trans-Danubian regions of Central Europe. Recently, a new section was added. New trains were brought into service, and the metro pioneers of Budapest are slowly catching up again. This says a lot about the Stockholm metro. It's not for running around town. It reaches far into the country, fetching and carrying its passengers from great distances. Stockholm is really a series of islands. Linking them by rail calls for a mixture of bridges and tunnels, many of them underwater. Swedish engineers solved that problem by prefabricating tunnel length, sinking them from pontoons, and pumping them out when they were in place. The tunnels through Stockholm's granite were blasted out of the rock by dynamite. It was crude but very effective, and about 1/5 the cost of making a concrete tunnel. Train sheds and repair shops are also housed in granite caves created with explosive. It's all very simple, since these spacious all-weather facilities require no superstructure. From the land that gave the world the sauna and the smorgasbord, the Stockholm metro is something else for which Sweden is to be envied. Along with the White House and the Washington Monument, the Washington Metro has become one of the attractions for visitors to the capital of the United States. For here is the kind of opulence usually associated with Cadillacs and Cartier. Compared to some of the others, this is a custom-built, designer kind of train. It is, quite simply, splendid. But there's more to the Washington Metro than just style. The architects of the system devised a simple method of economizing on tunnel space by designing station platforms on different levels within the same structure. Ever mindful of the need for constant mobility among its customers, Washington Metro has extended its network to embrace a fleet of special buses called Metro buses, which provide a rapid link between stations and nearby government offices and other important locations. It's almost a door-to-door service. Anywhere else in the world, it would be a good idea to encourage customers onto the Metro. In Washington, it's absolutely vital. The Metro reaches out to the very heart of commuter land, here poking its buffers between two 5-lane carriageways of a busy motorway. When the roads are clogged, the sleek freedom of the Metro delivers a powerful message, but it's not one that many want to hear. Weaning the majority of car-loving Americans away from the highway to the railway is going to be a long haul for the Washington Metro, magnificent though it is. In Vienna, they're pensioning off the old trams and taking up the tracks. Instead, they have the Metro. 3 lines which loop and swirl around the city, diving into tunnels and emerging daintily at little stations like this. And there's a reason behind this change of heart. It's to preserve the dignity and the gentility of this faded but still charming old lady of a city. With the trams off the road, it's said the traffic will flow more freely. There'll be more room to walk and stop and stare, to appreciate the history and the atmosphere of old Vienna. The Metro here is well established, but building it began with a deal of muddled thinking. Viennese authorities started construction in 1966 on an undersurface electric line, a sort of super tramway. But before it was finished, they realized it would be quite inadequate to cope with the increasing volume of commuter traffic. So they started another system, a true metro, but were faced with horrendous technical problems in converting the first line into a modern metro. It sounds the sort of thing a genteel older lady might well do. But old Vienna got away with it, and its metro blossomed into one of the most elegant of them all. The sign is bold and uncompromising. This is the Metro, and you are in Lille, France. Descend into the depths, and you find a metro system no less inflexible. There's nobody on duty to assist, no such person exists. For French ingenuity has found a way to create a metro which is completely computerized and automatic. It's certainly most efficient. Even without driver or guard, it stops, opens and closes its double safety doors, and accepts passengers most obligingly. So maybe the Frenchmen of Lille have found the ultimate, a user-friendly metro. Here in Lille, they've tried to make their metro different. Not only fully automated, but architecturally overwhelming. Yet when you reach the top, what do you find? A moment of pure charm, utterly human. Lille is no tourist spot. It's a small city of no particular history and with no particular attraction. It's mostly factories. But visitors are flocking here. They come from all over, engineers, designers, computer people, and electronic wizards, to study the most advanced metro in the world. Churchmen in Moscow once protested so loudly against the notion of an underground railway beneath the foundations of the city that the plan was abandoned. They said the railway was an attack against everything that is sacred to the people of Moscow. But the church became a museum, and the metro flourished. When it opened in 1935, the Moscow metro was 11 kilometers long and included 13 stations. Now it's 200 kilometers long and has 126 stations. The fare, however, remains the same. 5 kopecks to go anywhere. Worth it, surely, just to see the great vaulted corridors and the lavish ornamentation that adorns them. The metro owes its decor to Lenin himself. He decreed it should reflect monumental propaganda. Underpinning the whole metro system in Moscow is an enormous program of maintenance and repair. There are 2,500 cars on the move every day, and many of them are 30 to 40 years old. Each night sees dozens of them checked, repaired, fixed, patched up, and sent back to work in the morning. When they're back in service, the trains are monitored by controllers who ensure they run at very exact intervals. A train every 80 seconds. It's like a Red Square parade. Meticulous and precise and endless. An impressive piece of showmanship. For in truth, running a metro is as much an art as a science. Where better than Paris to begin a journey through some of the world's most interesting metros in search of artistic style? That certain je ne sais quoi, which endows each one with a special attraction. Stockholm has it. There they've made the metro stations the playground of artists. London's distinctive map of the underground is a model of imaginative and useful design. Munich has decoration. Vienna's metro has music of its own, composed by Johann Strauss. Where do the girls belong? Certainly not in Moscow. The Russians have chosen something much weightier for their brand of metro art. But then no two cities or peoples are ever the same. And it's the difference that makes them all so intriguing. A few steps from this metro station and you're in the Louvre, former palace of French kings, which now houses some of the finest and most famous art treasures. Here you'll find the Venus de Milo, the mysterious Mona Lisa, and some less elusive smiles. But you don't have to take the metro to find art in Paris. They bring art to the metro. At this station, they set up a picture gallery. In another, a permanent display of sculpture. Culture is something Parisians understand. To them, it has nothing to do with education. It's an atmosphere and a heritage. Anywhere else, they might have left a redundant station unlit and let the trains flash by in darkness. Not in Paris. Here, they called in an artist. He painted the whole place sky blue and recreated the seaside 100 meters below the streets of the city. Those who run it clearly believe the Paris metro should be fun. and they screen commercials to tell their passengers how much fun it is to buy a ticket before they travel. For young musicians, the metro is a top-of-the-bill engagement. It may not be Carnegie Hall, but it's a useful way of practicing in front of an audience and picking up a few francs at the same time. Music, painting, sculpture. They even have puppet shows on the metro. In Paris, perhaps more than in any other city, art is everywhere. Which brings us back to the Louvre, 10 minutes from the heart of Paris. By metro, of course. In its heyday, the Vienna Opera House was even more famous than Johann Strauss. And it survived, along with the composer's music, to become a symbol of a distant empire and culture. The genius of Strauss was that he could compose a tune to fit anything. He loved to walk and often made up melodies while strolling in this park. It's said that one day the idea of a railway journey crossed his mind. So he went home and dashed off this little polka called Excursion Train. The Vienna Metro now runs through the park where not only Strauss, but emperors of the Austro-Hungarian Empire once dallied for an hour or two. As a matter of fact, most of the metro passes through or under places where famous men once lived, worked and played. Indeed, this is a modern city forever haunted by the ghosts of its glittering past. Johann Strauss lived and worked all his life in the Austrian capital and died there in 1899, the most illustrious of a brilliant family. Millions of people throughout the world can remember little else about Vienna except that Strauss wrote The Blue Danube there. Music also features in the art of the Stockholm Metro. In fact, there's hardly a branch of the arts or sciences which does not in some way feature in the decor of this most astounding subterranean railway network. At one station, there's geological data in 3 dimensions and in geometric form on the surrounding rock formations. In these surroundings, one is reminded of the Swedish scientist Alfred Nobel, who gave his name to the annual Nobel Prizes for Achievement, and who also invented dynamite, used by the engineers who blasted the metro system through Stockholm's granite foundations. Equally determined to leave his mark on posterity, the artist who designed this vast platform left his profile as part of the decor. To environmentally conscious Swedes, The colour green on the rough-hewn rock walls of the station at Solna Centrum is a reminder of the need to protect the quality of life. The red represents the dangers to be found in the city above. The message is underlined in cartoon form on another wall, complete with a typically barefaced Scandinavian joke. Being Sweden, all this probably has a meaning too. Or perhaps it was just a very striking way to decorate the platform of a metro station. Narrated station serves the Swedish film industry. Narrated is where Ingmar Bergman and his team of actors and technicians made their mark on the movies and left their autographs on the platform. Of course, Narrated was here long before Bergman. Douglas Fairbanks Sr. was among the Hollywood stars who visited the studios in the 1920s. This event, along with props and costumes from recent Bergman films, is part of an ever-changing exhibition. They gave the Hallenbergen station to an artist to design, and he handed the job on to his grandchildren. Reproductions of their drawings are the theme of the entire station. At Tensta, the theme is the brotherhood of man, in 28 languages. The proximity of water to Stockholm and its metro is suggested here by the size and colour of this vast blue and glittering cavern at Lilleholmen. The range of artistry displayed in the Stockholm metro is bewildering. But here's a chance to take your bearings. Way out west means San Francisco and a Bay Area metro train, a blue sky and the lush countryside of California. As much as any city in the United States, San Francisco is a rich mixture of peoples, creeds, and cultures, and the variety of their presence is reflected in the fabric of the city itself. And perhaps more than any other American city, San Francisco has a soft and sentimental center. It likes to keep the things it treasures, like the cable cars. And the gaudy, pulsating, teeming neighborhood they call Chinatown. Chinese were brought to America to help build the great transcontinental railroads, and they never went back. By contrast, Moscow gives the impression of a city which takes itself rather seriously. Above ground, crowds of people rush and scurry, looking neither left nor right before disappearing into faceless blocks of offices and homes. Below ground, it's much the same. This is a station in central Moscow called Novoslobodskaya. It has corridors almost as long as its name, and they typify the older artistry of the Moscow metro, which is truly unique, if overpowering. It costs 5 kopecks to travel anywhere on the metro. That's the same fare as 50 years ago, when Soviet authorities built the metro and lavished money to make it a showcase for socialist art. The murals in the concourse roof each tell a story of achievement. In this case, a series of lighted panels depict the history of Soviet flight, a subject which has always fascinated the Russians and for which they prove to have a particular gift. Uplifting is the word to describe much of the decor on the Moscow metro. Frescoes like these are there not to amuse, but to inspire. Lenin himself approved of an early plan to construct a metro in Moscow. When it was finally built in the 1930s, the architects were careful to depict him in mosaics, sculptings and paintings as frequently as possible. Change trains as often as you like for your 5 kopecks, but you won't get away from the steady gaze of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Artists themselves have a place in Soviet society and a niche in the Moscow metro. Komsomolskaya station is one of Moscow's busiest junctions. It's where the ring line meets the main north-south line through the center of the city. 1 million people a day use the Moscow metro, most of them apparently coming through here. The defense of the nation underscores all Soviet life, and naturally it's given priority on the metro. Woman as heroine is another favorite topic for socialist artists, and the metro has its share of ladies with guns, as well as others in more seductive poses. Lenin called it monumental propaganda. The art of the Moscow metro illuminates the philosophy of an earlier, more defensive Soviet era. And if the thinking which provoked it is passing, it remains a most remarkable example of art for the masses. And now, welcome again to Lille, or Bienvenue à Lille. Either way, the place sounds and looks fairly ordinary. But in truth, it's quite surprising. In comparison with the Gothic appearance of most public buildings in the city, or anywhere else in provincial France, the new town hall is a revolution. It's a school of architecture from which the city metro seems to have taken its cue. Beneath the ground, the metro presents a totally different perspective on this gnarled old industrial city of Lille. A view of a practical place which is entirely pleasing to the eye. The trains on the system are as advanced as any in the world, being totally automated, swift, silent, and perfectly engineered to perform their task. The main metro centre is ultra-modern too. But that's not the real surprise. What comes as an eye-opener is that when you buy a ticket on the world's newest metro, they throw in a touch of the world's oldest attraction. There's no extra cost. It's all part of a most entertaining metro. Just what Sherlock Holmes would make of it, you'd have to go to London's Baker Street to find out. Conan Doyle's fictional sleuth and his faithful foil Dr. Watson, frozen forever in pursuit of the Hound of the Baskervilles, form the motif for this famous stop on the London Underground. The indicator points to a fairly sedate London suburb. But on the walls at Charing Cross Station, they've drawn some slightly racy pictures. They represent scenes from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, stories of the bawdy events which befell the artisan pilgrims who travelled to Canterbury from Charing Cross in the 14th century. A famous man once said that travel makes a man wiser but less happy. But he lived 200 years ago and never travelled on the Budapest metro. In Budapest, they do their best to disprove his words by the sheer determined brightness of the decor. There are no dark corners for the mind in these places. The architecture belongs to no particular style. It's just big and bright and breezy. And it looks as if the artist was planning a marvelous party while he was doing it. This is an unusual view of a metro station, one that has yet to know the footsteps of the commuter crowd. It's at Neustadt Square in Budapest and is part of a metro extension opened only recently. It's all been made deliberately functional. Hungarians explain it by recalling that theirs is a country repeatedly destroyed by other people's wars. Nothing remains of their past. Therefore, the tradition of architecture is not strong enough to impose itself on the design of a project like the metro. In any case, they didn't have the money. Tunneling through the wet earth beneath the mighty Danube is very complicated and dangerous work. So when it was done, perhaps they didn't have the energy either. There's no lack of it in Munich, but here again the stress is more on what works than on what looks good. So there's no extravagant design feature in most of Munich's metro system. It functions, and it functions efficiently. That's poetry to the Germans. Decor in the stations is rather perfunctory, not to say stark. But here, most people would rather be on the move than stare at a wall, so it's doubtful if anyone notices. In any case, the colour, the movement, the style and the exuberance of Munich are all to be found in abundance elsewhere on the metro network.
Gezeigt, was sich betragen kann. Schon früher nur, da fing an. Und später waren wir wieder aus. Sie schickt im Hofbräuhaus.
And this is where we come back to the beginning, watching the trains go by. In the world of metros, we've seen them at work in 10 cities, answering the different needs of different people in different circumstances. But in the end, they're all the same, just trains. So let's end by looking at it from the driver's point of view. In other words, let's play trains.
449